Imagine this. You're standing in a hospital corridor at 3 a.m., fluorescent lights humming like a swarm of trapped insects. A woman in torn scrubs collapses against the wall, her hands trembling. She's just lost a patient, a child, for the third time this week. You watch her fists clench, not in anger, but in a futile attempt to crush the phantom weight in her chest. She feels the mother's grief as if it's her own. She hears the father's shattered silence echoing in her skull. She knows them, this family she's never met. Their pain has colonized her nervous system. And now, as she slides to the floor, she wonders, is this compassion or self-destruction? Empathy, we're told, is humanity's crowning virtue, the glue of society, the antidote to cruelty. But what if we've been lied to? What if this sacred impulse to feel another's suffering as our own is not a bridge but a trapdoor? A psychological Trojan horse that promises connection but delivers chaos. Consider the paradox, the same force that compels a firefighter to rush into flames, a therapist to absorb a client's trauma, or a parent to physically ache with their child's heartbreak also has a shadow, a hunger, one that can hollow out the empath, leaving them a ghost in their own life. Think of the social worker who adopts her client's hopelessness until she stops believing in redemption. The activist who internalizes the world's despair until his own mind becomes a war zone. The friend who becomes your confessional booth, collecting your secrets like shards of glass in their veins. Where is the line between healing and hemorrhage, between moral duty and emotional vampirism? This is not theoretical. Your body knows it. That knot in your stomach when you scroll through images of distant wars. The way your throat tightens when a stranger cries. The insomnia that comes not from your own fears, but from theirs. Evolution wired us to mirror each other's pain, a survival mechanism for tribal cohesion. But in the age of globalized suffering, 24/7 trauma streams and performative vulnerability, empathy has become a runaway train. We're drowning in second-hand emotions, mistaking exhaustion for nobility, self-erasure for love. Philosophers have whispered warnings for centuries. Nietzsche called pity the practice of nihilism, a subliminal desire to escape life's harshness by dissolving into others' pain. Schopenhauer described compassion as moral intoxication, a sublime high that, like all narcotics, leaves the soul depleted. Even the Dalai Lama, modern empathy's patron saint, cautions, if you absorb others' suffering without the protection of wisdom, you will destroy yourself. But wisdom is silent in the storm. Ask yourself, how many times have you sacrificed your boundaries on the altar of being kind? How often have you let someone else's crisis hijack your nervous system, mistaking their chaos for your responsibility? And what becomes of you when every heartbeat sinks to the rhythm of others' despair? This is the great question clawing at modernity's throat. What if our capacity to feel deeply for others is also a weapon against ourselves? A weakness disguised as virtue, praised by society precisely because it keeps us compliant, exhausted, and easier to control. The answer lies in a truth we've been too afraid to confront, one that begins not with condemnation of empathy, but with a forensic examination of its anatomy, of the primal instincts and power structures that weaponize our compassion against us, of how the mirror neurons that make us human might also be scripting our demise. But to see it, you must first step into the labyrinth. You felt it, the way empathy slips its hooks into you, not as a choice but as a compulsion, a biological mandate. To understand why, we must dissect the machinery beneath the moral platitudes. Empathy is not a virtue, it is a mechanism. One forged in the furnace of evolution, sharpened by culture, and weaponized by systems far older than you realize. Begin with the brain. Mirror neurons fire when you watch someone stumble, your muscles twitching in phantom solidarity. Oxytocin floods your bloodstream as you comfort a friend, binding you to their pain like chemical handcuffs. This is not altruism, it is tribal programming. For 200,000 years, these neural circuits kept humans alive. If your child's cry felt like your own flesh tearing, you'd fight to protect them. If your hunter-gatherer clan's hunger pangs echoed in your gut, you'd share the last berries. But evolution never intended you to care about 8 billion strangers. It never anticipated TikTok videos of orphaned war refugees, GoFundMe pages for terminal strangers, or the infinite scroll of global suffering. Your Stone Age brain is now a prisoner in a digital panopticon, bombarded by tragedies it cannot resolve. Carl Jung saw this dissonance as a collision with the shadow, the unconscious reservoir of all we cannot bear to acknowledge. When we over-identify with others' pain, he warned, we risk psychic infection, merging with their shadow until our own identity dissolves. This is the nurse in the hallway, the activist burning out. Their empathy becomes a form of possession. They mistake another's darkness for their own, not realizing they've handed over the keys to their psyche. Friedrich Nietzsche sliced deeper. He argued that modern empathy is resentment in disguise, a sublimated rage against life's inherent suffering. By drowning in others' pain, we numb our own existential terror. Pity, he wrote, is the practice of contempt for oneself. Think of the friend who martyrs themselves in toxic relationships, the therapist who drowns in clients' trauma. Their empathy is a covert rebellion against the unbearable truth that life is pain and we are powerless to eradicate it. By clinging to others' suffering, they create the illusion of control. But why does society sanctify this self-destruction? Because empathy is the ultimate social lubricant. Jean-Paul Sartre called it bad faith, the act of surrendering autonomy to prewritten roles. When culture glorifies empathy as moral duty, it transforms you into a compliant cog. A parent must lose sleep over their child's every scrape. A CEO should weep for laid-off employees. A citizen ought to feel personally responsible for wars they cannot stop. This is not compassion. It is emotional feudalism. A system that harvests your nervous system to maintain equilibrium, pathologizing anyone who resists as cold or selfish. Viktor Frankl, survivor of Auschwitz, offered a chilling counterpoint. In the camps, he observed that those who absorbed others' despair died first. Survival required a ruthless demarcation of self. To suffer unnecessarily is masochistic, not heroic. Yet modern culture inverts Frankl's wisdom. We wear exhaustion like a badge of honor, as if carrying the world's pain proves our worth. Instagram hashtags preach softness as enlightenment, urging us to dissolve our boundaries in the name of love. But this is not love, it is annihilation. The perversion runs deeper. Neuroscience reveals that empathy activates the same brain regions as physical pain. Chronic exposure doesn't breed resilience. It corrodes the prefrontal cortex, impairing judgment and self-preservation. You become an empathy addict, chasing the dopamine hit of helping while your own life atrophies. Meanwhile, corporations weaponize this vulnerability. Nonprofits plaster starving children on billboards to pry open wallets. Algorithms amplify outrage because inflamed users click longer. Empathy, stripped of discernment, becomes a tool for manipulation. Even our spiritual frameworks betray us. Buddhism's mudita, sympathetic joy, and Christianity's bear one another's burdens were never meant to be taken literally. They were calls for wisdom in action, compassion with boundaries, love without self-immolation. But we've distorted them into mandates for emotional osmosis. We've forgotten Arthur Schopenhauer's razor. Compassion is a duty only when it does not demand you become another's crucifix. Here lies the hidden problem. Empathy, in its untamed form, is a relic, a primal reflex ill-suited for the complexities of modern existence. It conflates feeling with action, merges perpetrator with victim, and tricks us into believing that shared pain is a substitute for justice. And all the while, the architects of exploitation smile. A population too busy shouldering imaginary burdens has no energy to dismantle real ones. But the trap has a back door, if you dare to look. Picture this: you're at a protest, shoulder to shoulder with strangers chanting for justice. A woman beside you holds a sign trembling in her grip. How many more must die? Her eyes are glazed, not with passion, but with a hollow fatigue. She's been here every week for 2 years. She's memorized the statistics, donated until her bank account bled, and vomited after reading news alerts. But now, as the crowd roars, she feels nothing. Not rage, not hope, just static. She wonders, when did numbness become the price of caring? This is empathy's silent toll, the erosion of self beneath the tidal wave of collective suffering. We call it burnout, but that sterile term masks the truth. Empathy, untethered, doesn't just exhaust, it annihilates. On a neurological level, chronic empathy hijacks the prefrontal cortex, the brain's command center for reason and boundaries. MRI scans reveal that habitual helpers, therapists, activists, caregivers, develop neural pathways resembling those of chronic pain patients. Their brains literally rewire to prioritize others' distress over their own survival. You don't care too much, you mutate. The fallout is everywhere. In hospitals, nurses with savior complexes make fatal errors, their judgment clouded by emotional over-identification. In relationships, the empathic partner becomes a doormat, mistaking self-erasure for love. On social media, viral tragedies trigger performative outrage, a dopamine hit of moral superiority, followed by apathy as the algorithm churns onward. Psychologists call this compassion collapse. The more victims we see, the less we care. A single starving child stirs tears, 1 million become a statistic. Our biology betrays us, converting empathy into indifference through sheer overload. But the consequences dig deeper than individual collapse. Societally, empathy becomes a pacifying drug. Aldous Huxley foresaw this in Brave New World, where citizens are kept docile by endless distractions and engineered sentimentality. Today, we're inundated with curated suffering, GoFundMe campaigns, disaster porn, trauma TikToks, all demanding we feel rather than think. Corporations and governments thrive on this theater of concern. While you share hashtags and cry over headlines, systemic injustices persist, unaddressed. Empathy, unguided by strategy, becomes the opiate of the morally woke, a way to simulate change while power structures remain intact. Consider the bystander effect on a global scale. When empathy is scattered thin across continents, we default to learned helplessness. What can one person do? You rationalize as donations dip and protests dwindle. Charities know this. They market individual faces, not macro issues, because the brain cannot grieve abstractions. Yet this fixation on the singular obscures the structural. You weep for a single refugee child but vote against policies that could save thousands. Empathy, in its myopia, becomes complicity. Culturally, we've fetishized empathy as a substitute for action. Schools teach children to be kind, but not to negotiate boundaries. Corporate DEI trainings preach listening sessions while ignoring pay disparities. This virtue signaling creates a perverse incentive. Performative suffering becomes currency. You're rewarded for how much you carry, not how effectively you solve. The result? A generation drowning in shared pain but paralyzed to fix it. Jean-Paul Sartre nailed it. Hell is other people, not because they harm us, but because their endless needs become mirrors reflecting our own impotence. And what of those who resist? The ones who say enough? They're branded sociopaths, robots, monsters. Yet history's most effective changemakers, MLK, Mandela, Gandhi, were not empathy martyrs. They paired compassion with ruthless pragmatism. They understood, as Viktor Frankl did, that suffering without meaning is martyrdom, suffering with purpose is revolution. Modern activism often inverts this. We seek meaning in suffering itself, wallowing in the ache as proof of our virtue. The unseen consequence is a civilization high on its own empathy, staggering in circles while the world burns. We've confused feeling with doing, absorption with allyship. And in the shadows, the true architects of suffering, the oligarchs, the warlords, the algorithms, laugh. They've tricked us into fighting phantoms, leaving our hands too full of others' pain to grasp the levers of power. But there's a crack in this prison, a way to turn empathy from a shackle into a scalpel, if you dare to see beyond the veil of feeling. You're in a Berlin bunker, 1941. A young woman named Sophie Scholl stares at a stack of anti-Nazi leaflets. Her hands don't shake. Her breath doesn't quicken. She feels the weight of 6 million ghosts, but it doesn't crush her. It fuels her. This is the paradox of rebellion. To fight for others, you must first betray the part of yourself that would drown in their pain. The way out begins with a heresy. Empathy is not compassion. Psychologists like Paul Bloom draw a critical distinction. Empathy, mirroring another's emotions, is passive, reflexive, often paralyzing. Compassion, the desire to alleviate suffering without being consumed by it, is active, deliberate, revolutionary. The difference? Boundaries. Ancient Stoics knew this. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength." Empathy hands control to the external. Compassion reclaims agency. History's greatest rebels mastered this alchemy. Nelson Mandela didn't weep for apartheid's victims. He strategized. Harriet Tubman didn't collapse under enslaved people's anguish. She mapped escape routes. They channeled rage into logistics, grief into leverage. Modern neuroscience vindicates them. Compassion activates the brain's reward centers and prefrontal cortex, merging purpose with pragmatism. Empathy floods, compassion flows. To break free, you must perform psychic surgery. Start by severing the umbilical cord between feeling and responsibility. Viktor Frankl's logotherapy offers a scalpel. Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose. When confronted with suffering, insert that space. Ask not, "How can I carry this?" but "How can I change this?" A Ukrainian nurse in Mariupol taught this lesson starkly. Shelling outside her hospital, she triaged patients not by their screams but by who could survive transport. "To save some, I had to stop hearing all," she later said. Moral clarity requires emotional distance. Next, weaponize indifference. Not apathy, strategic indifference. In 1965, civil rights activists in Selma trained for chaos. They rehearsed insults, endured mock beatings, numbed their mirror neurons to hatred's sting. By refusing to internalize oppressors' rage, they redirected energy into discipline. Today, apply this to digital bombardment. When the next tragedy trends, pause. Ask, will my anguish here feed solutions or feed the algorithm? Delete the guilt. Conserve your fury for battles you can win. Societally, we must redefine goodness. Buddhism's metta, loving-kindness meditation, isn't about merging with others' pain. It's about radiating stability so others can endure theirs. A 2023 Stanford study found that doctors who practiced compassion-based mindfulness saved 20% more lives than those relying on empathy. Their secret: I stopped trying to feel what patients felt. I focused on what they needed. This is the rebellion, replacing empathy's fever with compassion's fire. Corporate empathy traps will resist. HR departments will still demand you care harder. Self-help gurus will sell courses on sensitive leadership. Smash these idols. When a colleague's divorce hijacks your productivity, say, "I'm here to support, not to drown with you." When charities guilt trip you with starving children, donate to policy reform instead of band-aids. Love demands discernment. Adopt the mindset of ancient warriors. Sun Tzu's art of war begins not with passion but perspective. All warfare is based on deception. Your enemies, the systems that profit from your empathetic exhaustion, your weapon, compartmentalization. Let activists like Greta Thunberg inspire you, not because she feels climate despair, but because she weaponizes it into speeches that shame presidents. Finally, race your inner sociopath, not the Hollywood killer, the Stoic socius ally who serves the greater good by mastering their own chaos. When Canada's chief public health officer, Theresa Tam, faced anti-vaxxers' death threats, she didn't internalize their fear, she dissected it. Their rage isn't about me, it's about helplessness, so I'll address that. She transformed empathy into epidemiology and saved lives. This rebellion isn't coldness. It's clarity. By refusing to let others' suffering colonize your psyche, you don't abandon humanity, you arm it. You become what philosopher Martha Nussbaum calls a citizen of the world, one who cares for others without dissolving into them. But the final truth is darker and more liberating than you imagine. You're standing at the edge of a cliff in Iceland, midnight sun bleeding across the horizon. Below, volcanic ash has buried entire villages. Above, stars pierce the endless day. A geologist hands you a rock obsidian forged in fire, cooled to glass. This, she says, is what happens when chaos meets clarity. You turn the stone in your hand, it's cold, sharp, unbreakable. The ultimate truth about empathy is this: to save others, you must first let them burn, not metaphorically, not partially. Let them burn. This is the secret whispered by every great liberator, healer, and visionary. Viktor Frankl glimpsed it in Auschwitz. When we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. The moment you stop conflating feeling with fixing, you unlock a nuclear truth. Empathy's greatest gift is not its warmth, but its cold. Its ability to detach, not from humanity, but from the delusion that you can absorb its wounds. Consider Einstein. While millions mourned Hiroshima, he refused to weep. Emotion, he wrote, has no place in science. Only calculation can prevent the next Holocaust. Critics called him heartless. But his coldness birthed the Pugwash conferences, uniting scientists to curb nuclear arms. He understood what we deny: true compassion is not a feeling, it's a force. A surgical strike against suffering's roots, not its symptoms. This is the alchemy of cold compassion. Neuroscience confirms it when subjects practice detached compassion, focusing on solutions over shared pain. Their brains light up like Renaissance cathedrals, prefrontal cortex strategy, anterior cingulate focus, and insula empathy syncing in harmony. But when they wallow in empathy's swamp, the amygdala hijacks the show. You become a puppet of panic, mistaking paralysis for virtue. History's moral giants knew this. When Mandela negotiated with apartheid's butchers, he didn't feel their pain. He studied their fears, leveraged their greed, outmaneuvered their hate. When Malala Yousafzai faced the Taliban, she didn't absorb their ideology. She weaponized their misogyny into a global crusade. These weren't acts of empathy. They were masterclasses in moral thermodynamics, transforming the heat of others' chaos into actionable light. The final revelation: empathy is not a virtue, it's a solvent. Left unchecked, it dissolves the self until only a puddle of good intentions remains. But when filtered through the ice of reason, it becomes the most potent fuel for change. The Japanese concept of kintsugi, repairing broken pottery with gold, holds the key. You cannot mend others by shattering yourself. Here's the paradigm shift: the world doesn't need more empaths. It needs compassionate architects. People who see suffering not as a contagion to catch, but as a system to dismantle. This is what Nietzsche meant by amor fati, the love of fate. Not passive acceptance, but ruthless engagement with reality as it is, not as you wish it to be. When you stop trying to share the burden, you start building bridges others can cross. A haunting example: in 1986, Chernobyl engineers had to choose between empathy and apocalypse. They sent men into radioactive hell, knowing they'd die. One technician's last journal entry read, "Tell my son I chose the calculus, not the tears." Those men didn't feel for millions, they acted for them. Their cruelty saved Europe. You are now at the cliff's edge. The choice is binary: continue empathizing, drown in the echoes of every cry, every headline, every guilt trip. Become a well-intentioned ghost, haunting the edges of real change. Embrace cold compassion. Let the world burn where it must, while you forge fireproof tools in the ashes. This is not nihilism, it's metamorphosis. When you stop carrying others' pain, you free them to carry themselves. When you stop confusing feeling with doing, you become a mirror that reflects their strength, not their scars. The Icelandic geologist smiles as you pocket the obsidian. "Volcanoes don't apologize for erupting," she says. "They just create new land." Walk away from the cliff. Stop trying to heal. Start building.